We talked on Tuesday about showing properties and mainly from like the buyer's point of view. So I was going to touch briefly on like looking at it from the seller's point of view today and how to make sure you schedule those and set that up appropriately. So that you have kind of both sides, and then also talk about actually showing the property, right? So we've talked about how to set up the showings, how to go in there, find the listings, how to organize them, how to set it up through showing time or on a piece of paper, kind of the timing between showings initially. We talked about all that on Tuesday. So from the seller's point of view, and if anybody has questions as we move along, feel free to interrupt me at any time and ask your question, or you can raise your little hand. I'm watching you. From the seller's point of view, you want to prepare your sellers in advance for showings. And this is part of when I do, I get the listing scheduled, or even sometimes during that seller presentation, if I know they're going to sign the listing agreement, then we start talking about showings. And it's different for like an $800,000 property versus a $500,000 property, or even like a $600,000 property. That like sub 650, I would say 650 and below, it's going to be really busy right now showing wise, and just kind of know where the market is versus not. If you're like 8-9 million, the showings are going to be a little slower. So you don't have to prepare your sellers in advance as much. If you're in that sub 650 market, sometimes I recommend that it's best for my sellers, if they've got family in the area or someplace to go, to leave for the weekend that we go on the market. Okay, on my showings on Finchley, I do not remember how many showings we had scheduled in addition to the open houses that were hosted. It was a lot of showings. And so they were inconvenienced most of the day with having to be gone. So sometimes it's just easier if they just are out of the area. My listing on Klondike that I had last year, they were like, perfect, we'll leave. Not a big deal. We'll go find an Airbnb or a hotel. We'll make a little mini weekend out of it. We'll just be gone. Right. So if you're in that where it could be really busy, that might be your best recommendation. And then sometimes, like when I was setting up my Ponderosa listing, they didn't have any place to go. They've got pets. Like it's harder to take pets to hotels and stuff and go make a mini vacation, because I needed them to remove the pets for the showings. So what I talked to them about is the potential of what we'll try to do is have a little bigger window for like an open house window. So instead of like a 2-hour window, what I was talking with them about is doing like a 4-hour window, whether we were hosting an open house that whole time or not. And then aiming in the MLS stating that I would prefer that people set up showings during the open house timeframes, so that we try to pigeonhole people through that 4-hour time block instead of all day from 9 a.m. until 7 p.m. Because their house was going to come on the market at 480,000, and I could guarantee you that we were going to have 50 showings of that property. Right? So it's entry level. There's very few properties at that mark. And so then what I try to do is I'll try to, on the MLS, I'll try to set my sellers up for success. There might be some other requests outside of that, but that we would try to point most of our showings through the open house timeframes. So I just try to take into account where my listing is sitting, how busy it's going to be, what my sellers are capable of doing, and what they're looking to, what their flexibility is. And I try to set it up for success that way. I don't always want to be, totally flex around the seller's schedule, because ultimately they've hired me to get their house sold. So that's my job. And part of getting their house sold is getting it shown. If we don't have showings, we're not going to sell the house. So we've got to take that all into account when setting that up. So that's kind of how I decide how I'm going to schedule my showings. And I always ask them, like, if there's things like these, my Ponderosa people, they work all day on Friday. They were going to be off work by about 4:00 on Friday. So to get the animals removed off the property, we were going to start showings on Friday. And so what I would have put in the MLS is showings start at 4:00 on Friday. So that we didn't have any showings prior to that. So it'd only be when they were going to be available to be able to remove the pets from the property. It's not ideal to me if you've got pets on the property to like lock them in the backyard and be like, you can't go in the backyard, because everybody wants to see the yard. Well, not everybody, but most people want to see the yard.
What are you doing with my car? Names, which
Out of there, could hinder you want to see the
To me,
property.
yes, please.
Maciel, did you have a question?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. So, I want to have at least the dogs removed, if possible, the cats out of the house if they are outside cats. If they're inside cats, sometimes I ask them to remove the cats too. The reason I do that is when people walk into a property to see it, if they see pets in the house, they automatically, even if there is no cat smell, they're going to be like, oh my gosh, this house stinks like cat, or I'm allergic to cats, so I can't do this. But if you remove the pets prior to them seeing it, then that mental block about pets in the house sometimes goes away.
Amy, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I love that. Great tip. Are we still doing the lending Thursday today?
We are at 11 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I wanted to make sure I had the right time. Thank you.
That's at 11.
Right.
So as far as showings go, that's kind of how I arrange it and set it up. I try to make sure I work with the seller's schedule. For like Finchley, they had a young kid that took naps. And so I said no showings between, it was like 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock daily, so that their nanny could put the kid down for a nap on a daily basis and they weren't totally caught off their schedule for a whole week, right? So we try to be accommodating, but in the same account, we also want there to be showings of the property. So we've got to kind of weigh and balance that and make it work. To set the house up for showings, what I recommend to my sellers is that they, again, we remove pets from the property when possible. We lock them up in a dog run if you can't remove the pets, or in crates or whatever. I don't want them running free. I don't want people walking around in the backyard with pets and getting bit, even by a dog that doesn't normally bite or something like that. I just don't want to take a chance. It's a liability. So dogs either need to be locked out or taken off the property. And again, cats, same thing. I try to make, it's amazing to me the number of buyers, of people that are scared of cats. They're generally not vicious animals, but there's a lot of people that are very scared of cats. So we try to remove those as well, or kick them outside. Especially if it's one that's like indoor only and can't let it outdoors. Like the first thing that's going to happen, somebody's going to open that door, cat's going to get scared of like stranger danger and shoot out the door. And now inside only cat has become an outside cat and we've lost their cat. So we don't want that to happen. So if it's an indoor only cat, oftentimes I ask them to like figure out how to remove it from the property during showings. We don't want mishaps.
Thank you for saying that. I know I just chimed in, but I'm terrified of cats. And
Yes.
so I will run out of the house when I've walked in with a client and I was the first one out the door.
Yeah. It's a thing.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I love cats. So when people dislike them, I'm like, why? I just feel so bad. Like, what experience did they have with cats? Because like everybody, all the cats I've ever had and people that I know that have them, their cats are so nice.
You know why people are scared of cats? Because, you know, your dog, if you die, your dog will lay down beside you and die, like watch where the red fern grows. But your cat, to survive, it'll eat you. So that you should be afraid of cats.
That's just lovely, Amy. That's great.
You're welcome.
Are you serious?
That's just what I needed to hear today. Oh, man.
Thanks for confirming why I fear them.
You're welcome.
I have 4 and they're all sweethearts.
I have 3 and they're
Yeah.
all outdoors, so they can't eat me if I die. All right. All right. So that's my thing with pets, right? People are scared of pets. I don't want even the nicest pets sometimes bite or sometimes run away. We actually lost a cat last week. It went under the house. We had the attic or the crawl space open because we were doing a pest inspection, and the cat, it was one that was kind of scared of people. So the second we left the room to go, he went to go like put his coveralls on or whatever. And the cat was like, stranger danger, there's a hole, jump down it. And then he was doing his pest inspection. He's like, oh, and by the way, there's like a cat under the house. So there must be access for cats to get underneath there. It looked healthy though. So it must be getting out. And I was like, what does the cat look like? I was like, No, he hopped down the hole. Now we're gonna have to leave the hole open. Let the cat out. So anyways, they just pets in general. If you've got a bunny hopping around the house, right? Like put it in its cage during showings. People just don't like animals running around, and you don't want people's kids chasing your animals. Okay, so remove. I instruct my sellers to make sure they turn on all the lights and open all the windows. We want the house to appear bright and shiny and light and open, and we create that atmosphere by making sure we turn on all the lights. In that same instance as well, too, they need to make sure all the light bulbs are working. It'll show better if all the light bulbs are working. When you walk through a house and like half the light bulbs don't work, you're like, what other maintenance items do these people not care about? Right? So we want it to show well. As far as setting up showings, everybody works it a little differently. Again, we talked about it. I use Showing Time. I actually pay for my Showing Time. I don't just use the free version that's provided through Barry's, because it doesn't have all of the options and features. So I actually pay for Showing Time. I think it's like $30 a month or something like that. It could be less, it could be more, but I think it's like $30 a month. And it allows me to take myself out of the picture for showings. So what happens is all of my listings, I say set up the showings through Showing Time. They go on the Showing Time. The buyer's agent requests their time of 3 o'clock. It directly goes to my sellers as a showing request and says, hey, we've got a showing request for 3 o'clock on Saturday. Yes or no? They type yes. It approves the showing, and now it adds to their calendar on Showing Time on their little app. So it's super handy that way. And I didn't have to be involved or available in order to make that showing happen. So I want to be involved as little as possible and give the sellers the freedom to do so. I instruct my sellers that if it doesn't work for them, to suggest a different time frame. So if they requested 3 o'clock and they're like, oh man, we've got a soccer game. We should be like walking in the door from that soccer game by like 2:45. We've got a baseball game at 3:30. Like we really need that 45-minute window in order to like get everything turned around and get back out the door, get some snacks. So then I go, that's okay. Like just suggest 3:30, right? Say no. Can you show it at 3:30 or after 3:30? So Showing Time allows them the ability to do that. My Oak View listing, which I highly don't recommend, my sellers wanted me present during the showings. I normally would have been like, no, that's not necessary. Like we have lock boxes and it restricts the number of access. Like it has to be a licensed agent. We track who has been through the property. But my Oak View listing had a whole room filled of football memorabilia that was all like signed and like really high dollar, as well as they have a lot of guns in the house in their closets and stuff. And so I understood them wanting somebody to be present while there were showings happening. And so I obliged them. It was also at a higher price point. So I knew I wasn't going to spend my whole weekend over there. It was still inconvenient, but we made it happen. So Showing Time allows it to go, the request to go to me first to make sure I'm available and I can hit available. And then it goes to the sellers for their approval. So I can set it up that way as well. It also, like during the open house timeframes, where you can set up exceptions. So like if we have an open house from 12 to 2, I can set it up. If somebody makes a request to see the property during 12 and 2, it just tells them to go and show. It automatically approves that showing, but it still tracks who scheduled those appointments so that it will request feedback and follow up from them. Also, if we have any price changes or any updates on the property, I can reach back out to all the agents that showed it really easy through the Showing Time app. So that's
I got
why.
a question.
What?
So is that, sorry to interrupt you. So is that why you use the paid version? Because that's the extra amenity that it offers?
Yeah, it gives me a lot more flexibility with how to set it up.
Okay. And then also too, for you allowing your sellers to be kind of in control of the showing times, do you do that for your vacant properties as well?
Yeah, so for the vacant properties, so with Showing Time, what it allows, in addition to being able to set it up through Showing Time and take me out for like a vacant property, it allows me to set it up where it's always go and show. So somebody requests the appointment, they automatically get approved. I usually don't allow overlapping appointments, so everybody has their own time there. But then the seller, instead of getting a request for approval, they just get an FYI alert that FYI, there was a showing scheduled on your property on Saturday at 3 o'clock or Saturday at 3:30 or Saturday at 4, right? So they get alerted so they can stay on top of, oh my gosh, look at all these cool showings that we're having. That's really neat. So they're kept aware of what appointments are being scheduled and what's going
Okay,
on with the property.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I didn't have showing time, so back in the day when I didn't have showing time, so showing time, I believe the basic version that you get through Barry's allows the request to be made, which is still nice because it keeps it all separate for you. And it doesn't allow it to pass through to the seller. I don't think. If it does, I think it has to pass through as a phone call and not a text message request. Where on the upgraded version, like I can pinpoint, like, do you want it as a email request or a text message request or a phone call request? Most people like the text messages. So it allows me to do that, but it still keeps track. So I think most requests, if on the free version, come to me because occasionally Barry's overrides my settings. And then I start getting calls from showing times to set up showings. But I still like the free version even then because it sets it up with a separate calendar. So I have a calendar for like Finchley and I have a calendar for Oakview. So I can open up the app and automatically see what showings have been scheduled for that property for that weekend. So
Amy, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
So when you're in the app, you can create a calendar for each listing and just go in there and look at the showing calendar. And that's in the free version.
In the free version. Yeah, you don't even have to create the calendar. Once the listing's in there, you can just pull up that listing and go showings on my listing and it'll show you the list of showings scheduled or the past showings.
Oh, awesome.
So yeah, so it does keep it separated, which is kind of nice. I would never, ever put my buyer's or my seller's phone number in the MLS to set up the showings directly with the seller. I do not want other agents talking to my sellers. It's just going to go bad at some point. My sellers are going to start like over promising and say, oh yeah, we'll leave that and we'll do that. Absolutely. Like have fun. I don't want them talking to anybody but me. So I would never put my buyers, you'll see sometimes in there, it's like set up the showing with the tenant or set up the showing with the seller and it's got their number in there. I wouldn't do that. If I were you, I wouldn't consider that best practices. I think you're going to run into issues doing it that way. So if I'm not using showing time, the showing request would become towards me, and then I would filter them through and set up those showings. Make sense to everybody?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. For your average property, we usually schedule showings in like 30-minute increments. So remember, I'm like, hey, a buyer's probably in and out in like 15 minutes. I usually tell my seller for your average property to expect them to be there for 30 minutes. So, and I ask them to leave the property like 10 minutes before the showing. So if the showing was at 3, I would say, hey, yeah, try to be out the door by 2:50 and then anticipate that the buyer's going to be there until 3:30. And that way they're gone for the entire period. So that's kind of how I prepare my sellers for that. And then oftentimes like the showings will end up getting stacked on top of each other. So if I was manually setting up showings and somebody scheduled one at 3 and then somebody called me to schedule at 4, I may be like, hey, actually, can you schedule that at 3:30 instead of 4 o'clock, right? If I wasn't using showing time, I would just ask them to, hey, can you do it at 3:30? And that way I've got one showing after another instead of a showing here and then an hour later a showing. And now we've spaced them all out at like big intervals. So I try to pack them in there a little closer. So that's kind of how I set up showings for my sellers. That's kind of my general rule of thumb. Timing I allow, kind of how I have the seller set up the property. If the sellers, I instruct my sellers that if they're going to be gone for the day, it never fails that like we won't have any showings scheduled on Sunday, on Saturday morning. And then my sellers go, oh, we're going to go to the beach tomorrow. And then they load up and they go to the beach on Sunday. And then we get a showing request and they're like, well, we didn't clean up the house and make it show ready. And you're like, do you want to sell your property? It's on the market. So I always instruct my sellers that if they're going to leave for the day, even if there's no showing scheduled, like if they're leaving for work on Monday, like make the house show ready. They don't have to turn on all the lights and open everything up, but make sure it's clean and your bras and underwear and stuff are like tucked away. Like nobody wants to see that. And inevitably, if the house isn't ready for a showing, somebody's going to schedule one. So always make it show ready until we have an accepted offer on the property. That way we can accommodate any showing requests that come in. Okay. From the buyer side, we already talked about how to schedule the showing, set it up. Now we've talked about how to schedule it from the seller side, what that looks like. Now we're actually like showing the property to a buyer. We had this conversation on Tuesday that like having an info sheet for the buyer when they walk through each property is helpful and handy. So absolutely, like the Barry's one-page report is a great report to have with them. That it'd be the client one-page report that you can hand them as they hit each property so they can see all the details. It'll prevent you from having to like thumb through the listing to answer all their questions, because a lot of things they can answer on their own with that information. And I always, kind of let the buyer into the property first, right? You're going to open the door. Even if they say your appointment's approved or the house say it's vacant, always knock on the door before you use the lockbox. You'll run into properties that, they knew there was showings. They didn't leave the house. They were having sex in the bedroom. It'll happen. I promise it'll happen. So always knock or ring the doorbell before you use the key box and wait a few seconds. And then always when you open the door to show a property, just be like, hello, Amy with KW Vaca Valley here to show the property, right? Announce yourself. Just that other level of protection. I used to show properties back in the day when there was all the foreclosures and there would be squatters in the property. So you want to give them time to get out. If you've
That's the truth.
That's the truth. If you've caught the sellers off guard because they fell asleep or they forgot there was a showing, you knock on the door, you wait, they didn't hear you, you open the door, you announce yourself, then they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I forgot that, right? So you just want to give them a couple levels of like announcing that you're coming in the door so that you don't get shot. Nobody wants that. And then, so I open the door, announce, and then I let my buyer in front of me in most cases. Remember our open house rule of thumb, like we always want to have our exit point. Same thing with our buyers. Even if we know our buyers, it's just a good practice to be in the habit of allowing them to walk into the property first where you're by the door, and always keeping a door there in case you needed to exit for some reason. It's just a good practice just to always show properties that way. Is that way, if you're ever showing properties to somebody you didn't know, you're set up for success. If lights aren't on as we go through the property, I'll go through and pop the lights on for the buyers. As they see rooms and leave rooms, and I'll pop the lights off so I don't have to go back through and turn them off later.
Amy, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is it, so if you don't have, can you bring like somebody just like hang out in the car or just like stay by the door if you don't trust these people?
Absolutely. I highly recommend bringing backup if you don't know the people or you don't trust them.
Okay.
Yep. When my kids were little, they used to come and sit in the cars, not as backup, but because that's what we did. I didn't want to pay for a babysitter. I was poor. I was a poor, lowly agent trying to get my start. They went around and saw lots of properties with me. And then as I got to know the clients and they got to know me, then sometimes they would come in the house with us. It's quite fun.
It's crazy how people now will like just tattle on people, like, but I get it for the safety, but like back then, like I mean, we used to do the same thing, sit in the car when my parents were doing their taxes, like,
Yeah. Yeah, it happens. So it's totally appropriate to bring somebody along with you if you don't know the people. I would even recommend it. Show the property, turn lights on, encourage them to open doors and cabinets, right? People are kind of like embarrassed because they're like, well, if I open the closet, it's their personal stuff. Yeah, but you're thinking about buying this house. So it's totally appropriate to like open the closets, look inside the cabinets. Like, you're not looking at buying their pantry items, but you are looking at buying the pantry. So know what the space is in there, know if there's shelves available, right? Like, you want to see the property in its entirety. So encourage them to do all that. There's nothing wrong with that. They can walk out in the garage. They should go out in the backyard. The shed usually stays. So if it's not locked, like, open it up and look inside of it. Totally okay to do so. So yeah, so, you know, you walk through the property, check it out, answer any questions that they have. Ask them questions as they go through, right? Like, oh, the last one we had carpet. How do you feel about this one that's got like laminate floors versus carpet? Oh, well, I prefer the laminate. Great. Do you prefer this one that's got a more open, or do you prefer the more traditional plan that we saw in the last house, right? Like, figure out what it is so you can really nail down what they like in a home. Are they picky? Are they not picky? Oh, this one needs some more work. How do you feel about that? Oh, I'm okay, you know, right? So you're going to ask them questions to really try to narrow down more in depth what it is that they're exactly looking for. I would say your goal is, like, you really want to show like 3 to 5 properties before writing you don't want to show more than 3 to 5 properties without writing an offer. So you're really trying to narrow down what their exact property is so that you can put them in a situation for success, and you're not out there showing 30 properties that they don't like any of them, because they're really looking for something that what they thought they want wasn't really what they wanted. When I open the lockbox, hold on. The lockbox lesson, right? You have your app. Oh, by the way, I figured out something on the app. So we have our eKey app, our super eKey app here. And when you open it, we went into settings a while back. We were talking about this app and went into more and then settings. And one of the settings was CBS input. Oh, you're over there. I was like, where are you? You're over there. One of the options, and I was like, oh, I don't know what that is. But if you click the CBS input on, then when you go to obtain key, which is how you're going to open the lockbox, it asks for your code and the CBS code. So we don't have as many CBS codes as we did back when COVID was really a thing and we had the PEEB forms and everything. But if there was a CBS code, I could plug in my PIN code and the CBS code here instead of having to stop and re-enter it. So if you don't put in the CBS code here and they require that additional security code, if you just put in your PIN and hit begin, then it's going to start to open the lockbox. It's going to prompt you for that CBS code. You're going to have to put that in, return on the lockbox, and then it'll finally open the lockbox. You have to turn it on twice, but you can put in the CBS code right there on that screen. If you have that setting turned on, it asks for both your PIN and your CBS code.
So are you saying switch on the CBS input? That way if it's required? Okay.
Yep. And the other thing that you can switch on in those settings is it asks you, hold on, for require PIN only once a day. It's the second to last option. I would turn that one on too. If you're showing multiple properties, you'll only have to enter your PIN on the first one. And each one after that, you'll just have to hit obtain key and then turn the lockbox on and hit begin. You don't have to actually key in your PIN anymore. So those are both good settings that I would recommend. And all right, so you hit obtain key, you put in your code and hit begin. And then my app's going to go say, if you're using a Bluetooth lockbox or key box, turn it on, right? So then to turn on the lockbox, you push up on the bottom of it and let go. And that's turning it on. Normally it should start flashing red. I don't know if you can see that, but it's flashing red because it's working. If my volume was on my phone, it'd go beep, 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 and then it would like make a noise that it was successful. My volume's off. So it says success. So then to open it, you push up and let go, and then this falls out. If you're too slow when you push up, then it'll relock it on its way back out. So just push up and then drop your hand down so it can fall into your hand. This is where the key box should be, where the little key should be, is in this little pocket right here. Take the key out. I usually don't put this back in the lockbox until I'm done. So this is usually hanging on like the gas line or the water main or the stair rail. So I'll take this out, put it down beside it or next to it or on the plant next to it or whatever. Take the key, go unlock the door. I leave this out so that if an agent comes in behind me, They know that somebody's already showing the property, that somebody has the key, so they don't waste their time opening an empty lockbox, and they know that they have to wait their turn. So if you do show up to a property that already has a showing going on to it, you're gonna wait patiently outside until that showing is done. Instead of trying to show it at the same time, you're gonna let those people have their time in the property to see it without somebody else breathing down their neck. And you'll wait patiently outside until they leave, and then you'll go and access the property. Most of the time, if there is somebody there, they'll put the key back and put it back in the lockbox so that you have to register your use as well. Or sometimes they'll hand you the key, be like, hey, just register your key, even if it's empty, and then they'll hand you the key. So that's completely acceptable practice. So if you're like, that was rude, they didn't hand me the key. Well, it's because they don't want to be responsible for it if you walk away with the key after you're done showing and don't return it, if you've never registered with the lockbox, because then they'll get blamed for stealing it. Make sense to everybody?
Yep. What did you say the CVS code was, or whatever that thing was?
Some properties will have a CVS code, and it's an additional 7-digit code that you'll get from the listing agent.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So if maybe the listing agent requires a pre-approval letter before showing or something like that, they may say, yeah, you're confirmed for 3 o'clock tomorrow. Once you send me over the pre-approval letter, then I'll send you over that CVS code for access. You won't be able to access it without that code. Once you're done, what?
Oh, I was gonna say, Amy, that sometime I've walked in a couple homes and the agents have left like the sliding door unlocked or the back door open and something like that. So that's why I like to register myself at my time.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do come across that, right, you walk into a property and you're like, gosh, it was left unlocked, or the sliding door wasn't even closed, I'll usually just text the listing agent and just let them know, like, hey, just so you know, when I got here, the back door was wide open. Just so they know that I didn't do it, and if there was anything missing, like, hey, here's what happened.
Yeah.
Also, on some of the newer properties, the French doors that go to the backyard, you've got to lift up on the door handle just a hair to lock it. So it won't, it's a child safety thing, so your kids can't lock you out of the house. So you got to lift up a little and lock it. So if you ever have problems locking one of those French doors, or even sometimes the sliding glass doors have little safety mechanisms like that on them. Sometimes that's why, like, the agent couldn't figure out how to lock it. So be smarter than the agent.
Amy, how much are those, the lock boxes?
The lock boxes run, I think, about $120 a piece.
And we get them
Oh, that's
straight
cool. You don't
from,
rent them? Nice. Okay.
and where do we get them from?
You're going to get them from the association, the local association. So you would go to the Northern Solano Association of Realtors to get lock boxes.
Okay.
And
Thank goodness it's not a monthly price for those things, because they get you on everything monthly.
a one-time fee. One-time fee.
Amy, can we loan our lockbox out?
You can, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And like on mine, this one's kind of faded, but I write on the back like petard, and then like this one's Metro List, not berries. So I write that on it because I've got a mix of berries and Metro List boxes. You can reprogram your boxes. So if you had a listing in Vacaville this month, and then next month you had a listing in, I don't know, Sacramento, you can go to the Sacramento Association of Realtors or the Woodlands Association of Realtors, and you can have them reprogram your lockbox for Metro List. So it is a different key code for each different MLS area, and you can have them reprogrammed. So just know that you don't have to like necessarily buy a new one. You can use the same one, just have it reprogrammed.
Oh, thank you. I didn't even know that. I thought once you got the lockbox, it was good, throughout California, but okay.
No, so once you get the lock, most of mine are Barry's lock boxes. So they can only be accessed by somebody with a Barry's MLS access PIN code. So if you want to go show properties like in the Yolo County or Sacramento County or down in the Bay Area, you need to co-op your key with that MLS system. That is an additional fee. So like to co-op with Metro List, I think it's like an extra $13 or $15 a month. And that allows you to be able to open Metro List boxes as well as Barry's boxes. Okay. Once you're done showing the property, you're going to tuck the key back into the little pocket. and the pocket goes towards the front of the box. You're just gonna put it up in there until it clicks, and then it'll stay inside. And then you're all done and you can move on to your next property.
That one on Finchley had the keypad.
The one on Finchley had the keypad, so when you opened the lockbox, it had the code.
The piece of paper, yeah, with the code. That was pretty cool. Took me a minute to get it though.
So yeah.
Hey, Amy, I have a
Yeah.
question. This is Tara.
Yeah.
What advice might you have for showing homes to buyers who are not from the area? Like they're far away or out of state and you're doing virtual showings with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're doing virtual showings or you're videoing the property and then sending it off to them, I absolutely, and I've sold houses that way. I've sold houses to people that have never seen the listing prior to closing on it. I always give them a shot of the neighborhood. So I always start out in the front of the property and I give them a shot of the street, right? Because you can tell a lot about a property and a neighborhood by seeing what else is around it. And so I always like, instead of being like, oh, there's shady people on this street, because somebody's definition of shady might be different than yours. I would just be like, here's the street and the neighbors, and everybody seems well manicured, or there's a lot that have like dead lawns or a lot of broken down cars on the street, right? So I'm just going to show them the neighborhood and then walk into the property. I'm going to try to make it flow when I walk through the property. So I usually show the main areas of the home first and then cycle down the hallway to the bedrooms and bathrooms. And just walk them through it, just like you would if you were in, well, even more in detail than you would if you were in person with them, because in person they can kind of see it themselves, where on the video you're trying to like walk them through and explain it. And it's hard to get like size aspect ratios and stuff on video. So you just want to kind of walk them through that. Make sure you open the closets for them and show them inside the closets, inside the bathrooms. Pull the shower curtain back on the tub so you can make sure to show them inside the shower or the tub area. Open closets and show them, what kind of storage is available. But you're really going to walk through just like you would if there was a buyer with you.
Okay, I got a follow-up question. Thank you.
Yeah.
So how much?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tara.
How much can you say about the neighborhood and the area, like to be specific, if you know that it's kind of a questionable area without being unethical?
You can't say anything.
Really?
Yeah. Ultimately, you're not supposed to say anything. My general rule of thumb is if I feel like it's a questionable area, I may recommend that they check the local police activity or whatever. There's my
Okay.
code word.
So I'm speaking with buyers right now that are out of state, and I recommended that they look at the crime reports in the area. But yeah, it seems like they're interested in it, but I'm pretty concerned about the area because they're out of state and they're not familiar.
Yeah, and you never see.
I don't know how much I can say.
Yeah, you don't want to say too much because you honestly, like, you don't know what their situation is either. Like maybe that kind of neighborhood is completely acceptable and okay with them. Like maybe something that's a little bit more questionable is totally fine and not questionable to them.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Right. So you never know what might be like a funky neighborhood to one person or to another. Like honestly, the worst neighborhood I ever lived in was in Stonegate. That was the worst neighborhood I've ever lived in. We had our house broken into, the neighbors stole my daughter's underwear. Like there was all sorts of things that happened in a really nice neighborhood.
People do that in nice neighborhoods because they know it's nice. And so
They
that's
know
why
it's
there's
nice.
crime sometimes.
Yeah. We lived over in that neighborhood over where my listing is in Ponderosa. I actually used to be their next door neighbor. And I would say out of all the neighborhoods, like if you looked around the neighborhood, you'd be like, oh, this is like kind of a shady neighborhood. And it was like, there was a couple houses that had like drug operations and stuff, but the SWAT team was there all the time. Like the police were watching the neighborhood. I never hesitated to let my kids go play out in the street and enjoy the neighborhood and play with the neighborhood kids there. Like it's probably one of the best neighborhoods we ever lived in. And I knew the police had their eyes on it all the time.
There's a few police officers out that way
Yeah.
in that area.
So you just never know. So yeah, you don't want to try to like describe doing video. You want them to see the neighborhood, right? And see it for themselves, or recommend that, hey, because you're not in the area, like definitely look up the crime stats for the area. And you can even have websites ready that you could forward over to them that would show them different crime stats for different areas or different cities. And that would be appropriate, but outside of that, you really aren't going to make any recommendations of this is a good neighborhood or a bad neighborhood or where you would want to live or not. Sometimes my clients will be like, well, would you go for a walk in this neighborhood after dark? And I'd be like, yes or no, right? If they ask you a direct question like that, you can answer it. Any other questions? That's kind of the showing in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question, sorry. So if they did ask, like, I mean, just any of them, not even your, any of your clients asked about the area or what they thought about the area, like, you're not supposed to say anything?
Yeah, so if somebody's like, well, what do you think about this area? You can be like, well, it looks like there's a lot of rundown cars on the street. So I don't know how you feel about that, but that's like, point out some facts about the neighborhood. And if they're like, hey, would you go for a walk here after dark? I'd be like, yeah, I would, or no, I wouldn't. I'm going to answer that question directly.
So like good or bad, you can't just try not to imply so much, but only like just by visual, say something about it.
Yeah,
The
say
visual.
something visual. Like, oh yeah, when you look around, it looks like most of the neighbors are keeping up their yards and everything looks well manicured and nice and everybody's parking in their driveways. Whatever. Describe it.